Welcome to the Myth and Magic Authors Podcast, folklore and fantasy topics aimed at creative storytellers. To write stories and challenge your brain with exciting ideas, delve into these presentations and reflections. See how fantasy realms are based on actual world history, legend, and lore. Study fairy tales, nature fables, and supernaturalism to engage in a jumble of concepts that will trigger your fancy and get you writing imaginatively. Now, here's your host, Neil Mack.
Hello, fantasy fiction fans, and welcome to another edition of Myth and Magic, the podcast for fantasy fiction authors. So today I'm going to talk about what every experienced author has learned the hard way. But first, I'm going to ask the question, what is the point of mythological creatures? Plus I'm going to give you 10 folk monsters that you may not have ever met before. So let's start with the mythological creatures. Believing in something that cannot be seen is not irrational. Actually, it's a pragmatic and common sense survival skill. Before you start creating fabulous monsters and mythological creatures for your story, try to think about what they're there to do. And here's a few tips to get you thinking. Mythological creatures and fabulous monsters are there to do one, or perhaps more than one, of the following. Are you ready? They're there to defend and uphold morality. So, for example, honesty and integrity will be rewarded and sins will be punished. Or they're there to enforce taboos. In other words, they help to stamp out prohibited practices. Or they're there to connect humans with divinity. So, for example, angels bring us messages from God. Or they're there to warn us against invisible dangers. For example, trolls are there to scare you from going into the mountains alone. Or they're there to establish or uphold sensible proprieties. So, for example, they reinforce the agreed standards of decency for a society, or standards of courtesy. So, for example, don't run around without your clothes on, or a boogeyman might grab you, or please wash your hands after touching a corpse, or a zombie might eat you. Or they're there to remind folks of sensible precautions and preventatives. So, for example, take a stick when you're travelling through the forest in case you meet a mischievous imp. Or they're there to help maintain a general state of readiness in society as a whole. So, for example, hide inside your hut or inside your cave during a storm, otherwise a dragon might come and eat you. And finally, and for us anyway, for fantasy fiction authors, the most important bit, I suppose, is they're there to entertain us. In the stories that we recite, they come to entertain us through their breathtaking exploits. As a society, it makes sense to be aware of the things that are out there that are bigger and more aggressive than we are. It's true that some threats are invisible to us, so we may not see them until it's too late. The goal of many mythological creatures is to prepare us for these unspeakable and unknowable threats, the ones that are unseen. Some threats are so rare, or so small, or so deceptive, or so obscure that we don't recognise or understand the danger until it's too late. A great example of this is the threat caused by the submicroscopic infectious agents known as viruses. Most viral agents are benign. They're all invisible, and a few of them, will kill us. We didn't see COVID coming, did we? But even if we had seen it coming, could we have protected our society from it? Probably not, but we might have strengthened our defences against it if we'd kept an open mind to the invisible danger that it posed. But we can only do this, we can only keep an open mind if we're in the habit of protecting ourselves from ineffable threats, which apparently we are not able to do anymore. And in fact, there are still people, and some of those people are prominent people and even world leaders who don't believe in COVID, even though to date there have been over 160 million cases, and 3.3 million deaths. And I'm speaking in May 2021. Believing in something that you cannot see is not irrational. In fact, it's a pragmatic and a common sense survival skill. Certainly, we should be, as a population, aware of the ineffable threats to our existence, and we should know by now, surely, how to deal with an immeasurable tragedy when it happens, because it's happened so many times before. We've been threatened by invisible things so many times before, and we've been destroyed by invisible things so many times before. We should be used to it. If we can't do these things because we refuse to believe in the invisible and we refuse to accept the metaphysical, then it only makes us weaker as a species, not stronger. That refusal makes us weaker. Being sensible about invisible and imagined threats is not a weakness, it's a strength. So in other words, believing in mythical and imaginary monsters is actually a type of basic risk management. So for example, did you know that you can get headaches and muscle aches and even very bad fever if you bathe in contaminated water? There's a very nasty blood infection which is caused by the leptospira bacteria that can even make you go blind. They don't really need to put a sign up on the edge of a pit to tell you not to bathe inside the gravel pit, do they? Yet people suffer the ill-fated outcomes of bathing in gravel pits every day of the week. They should have been aware of the obvious dangers of bathing in a gravel pit. They must have been aware of the unspeakable threats that were posed by the gravel pit. Because there are other dangers beyond the bacteria. There are other dangers that lurk in the cold, polluted waters of a gravel pit. These dangers are unseen, and they might even be imaginary. They could be, for all I know, giant eels there, or entrapments like shopping carts that are laying like traps under the surface, or there might be hideous leeches, giant leeches living there. It doesn't mean that any of those things are not real just because they're imagined, and it doesn't mean, and this is the most important bit, it doesn't mean that the dangers are not real just because they're imagined. The dangers are very real. If we are aware that there are things out there that can harm us, even though we cannot conceive of them, and probably it's because we can't see them, but it's most likely also because we can't imagine them, and there are things out there that are beyond our control because they are much more powerful than us, then it enables us as a society and as a species to deal with conjectural threats as well as tangible threats. And that's the point, I think, of fabulous and mythological creatures. They enable us to deal with imagined threats. So the nameless thing that lives in the dark under the stairs is warning you about entering confined spaces without telling anybody. And the nameless thing that lives in the darkest part of the forest is warning you against straying from the straight path and entering into an unknown world where hidden and unimaginable dangers may be lurking. So I said that I'd give you 10 folkloric monsters that you may never have encountered before. And these 10 folkloric monsters, which may be unknown to you, but they're all written down in folklore, these will help, I think, clarify some of the thoughts I've just raised. So the first one is the Almaz, A-L-M-A-Z. These are evil creatures of the forest with magical powers. The Almaz female is very beautiful with large breasts and golden hair, and she dances naked in the moonlight. A certain degree of circumspection and caution is required if a mortal man sees a remarkable dancer in the moonlight who seems too good to be true, because she might be an Almaz, and if she is, she'll devour you if you get close. An Almaz is a creature that cautions men to be wary of tantalising promises, because they seldom come true. And then the Eloko, E-L-O-K-O. These are dwarf-like creatures that live in the densest, darkest and deepest parts of the forest. They are protectors of their treasures, so they will devour any human who approaches. A traveller might get lost in dark forests. So these creatures caution against travelling alone in forests after dark, because there are pitfalls that you can't see. And then there's the Makoli Mbembe, Mokele Mbembe is Mokele These are water-dwelling entities described as half elephant, half dragon that appear to be similar to Loch Ness type monsters. So Loch Ness monsters may well be Mokele Mbembe. Hippos and alligators, we know, will attack people on the riverbank. And you can't always see hippos and alligators because sometimes they're submerged. Hippos are very dangerous animals, probably more dangerous than alligators. So the Mokele Mbembe are creatures that serve as a cautionary reminder of the dangers of hanging about on riverbanks. And there's the Obambo, O-B-A-M-B-O. The Obambo are diabolical spirits that escape from somebody who has not been interred or buried correctly. Now it's believed that if mourners sing, dance, shout and bang things around, and they dance around a properly buried person, then they will drive the Obambo away. So always bury your dead away from the town boundaries, away from where people live, and make sure that you take special care to perform the funeral rites correctly. Then there's the Peri, P-E-R-I. These are beautiful but mischievous winged spirits. They're a bit like naughty angels. And their job is to deny entry into paradise until the soul of a person has completed the penance for the atonement. So these creatures warn people about a life of sin, but they also warn people about the stupidity of not seeking reconciliation while a person is still alive. So if you have sinned, confess your sins while you still can. Ponaturi, P-O-N-A-T-U-R-I, are a group of hostile goblinoid creatures that live under the sea during the day, but they return to the shore each night to play. They fear daylight, which is fatal to them. If they find a child swimming in the dark, they will take him to the bottom of their ocean to drown him. And Tipua, T-I-P-U-A, are demons that take their shape from an uncanny or unfamiliar object. These objects might be just commonplace objects, but they are in the wrong place. Or sometimes they might be weird. So they might be weird looking, like a unusual tree or a distinctly odd looking rock. Never approach or touch anything that seems strange or unfamiliar to you, especially if you're young or inexperienced. Otherwise the object could suddenly turn into a Tipua demon, and if it does, it will devour you. The Tao Mona, T-A-O-T-A-O-M-O-N-A, are ancient ancestral spirits who live wild and untamed in the highest mountains and the most remote places. They can be mischievous and or monstrous, and they will trick or catch an incautious traveller. So never travel into wild places on your own, or the Tao Mona will get you. Vishaps, V-I-S-H-A-P-S, are winged snakes that only come out in thunderstorms, although they also appear during earthquakes. Vishaps tend to devour or steal young children and toddlers, so parents, keep your kids inside during storms and during quakes. And Yaksa, Y-U-X-A, Yaksa are cunning snake-like creatures that can magically transform into beautiful women. Once transformed into a beautiful damsel, they will attempt to marry vulnerable and unwitting men, with the express intention of begetting offspring from them. Sometimes the monster will transform into a handsome male to despoil a vulnerable and unwitting female. Once their victim successfully fertilises with them or into them, they revert to their original snake form. So when constructing your fictional monster or your mythological creature, think first, what's the point of it? Why do people in my world that I'm creating, why do they believe in it? And what will its role be? Does it uphold morality? For example, will honesty and integrity be rewarded while sin gets punished? Does it enforce taboo? So in other words, will it help stamp out forbidden practices? Does it connect humans to divinity? So in other words, does it provide interaction and messaging from a deity to human and vice versa? Does it warn against unseen dangers? For example, is it a cautionary tale about swimming in dark waters at night? Does it establish or uphold sensible proprieties? For example, does it reinforce agreed upon standards of decency and politeness? In other words, don't eat your own bogies, otherwise a monster will grow inside your brain. Does it remind folk of precautions and preventatives? So, for example, take a stick while travelling in the woods, otherwise an imp might jump out at you. And lastly, does it help maintain a general state of preparedness for your society? So, in other words, hide your family inside the cave or inside the hut during a storm. So that's the point of mythological creatures, and make sure when you're constructing your creatures, make sure that there's a point to them, and try to get your head around why people believe in them. Good luck with your monster creation. Let me know how you get on. And if you have any tips or advice or just want to ask me questions, tweet me at Neilmach, Neilmach, all one word. Good luck! I said I'd tell you what I've learnt the hard way, and these are the things that I think every experienced author has learned the hard way. So here we go. Are you ready? A genre is nothing more than a pigeonhole. Do you want to be lumped in with others, or do you want to stand proud? Never force the shape of your story to fit somebody else's hole. Do whatever you want in fiction. You are the supreme authority in your own world. You are the legislator, you are the referee, and you are the judge. If you don't like what you see, rebuild it until you are happy. And don't follow the herd. Do nothing for others. Choose your own route. And each paragraph should make them, the readers, feel something. If you don't get them involved, then you've done something wrong. So go back and reshape things until you're sure that they will participate in your story. They will only participate if they feel something. And now I'm going to quote from Ernest Hemingway for my next one. Ernest is one of my favourite authors. Easy reading is hard writing. Great concepts are to a penny. Everyone has a great idea for a story. It's writing the story that makes it real, not thinking about it. It's only those who write and finish their work that will be distinguished as the players and not as the spectators. In editing, each sentence will require rewording, and it will take a while. Don't rush the process. Read each line aloud, then redo it. And learn to accept creditable criticism, but also know when to trash the rest. Make your most outlandish characters identifiable to you and your reader by giving them a commonplace and a recognisable trait. But be consistent, because once they possess that trait, it will be their driver. And a pathetic paragraph is better than no words at all. If that's all you can accomplish today, just a bad paragraph, well, settle with it, but never settle with no words at all. And play with phrases and play with words and play with ideas, play with characters, play with plots, because writing is fun. However, as the gambling ads all say, when the fun stops, stop. And seesaw your verbs to get rid of the ed, the d and the t enders, and instead choose strong verbs, and these are the ones that have changed their tense by altering the sound of their vowels. Don't use ed, d and t enders, use strong verbs. And set a theme early on, and then remind yourself and your reader of your theme as you go along. Your best moment is when you sensitise your reader. That is, you make your reader consider or feel things, perhaps situations and realities that they already encountered and maybe they thought they understood, but you have managed to explain these things in a novel way that they never thought possible before. And this is what I call crystallising the thought shapes. So good luck with your writing. Let me know if you've got any tips or advice or things you've learnt the hard way. Next week I'm talking to the hugely talented and very, very busy Sophie Laselle. She lives in Somerset in England, and she's busy at the moment prepping her book Upon All Men for its forthcoming release. and she's asking for some ARC readers to come forward who can help with her revisions and for her beta editions. She's a workshop director. She's the manager of a trust. She's an artist, and she's, of course, a novelist. So I think it's going to be a really exciting and interesting interview. So listen in next week to me chatting with the fantasy author Sophie Lazelle. In the meantime, have a great week, and I'll see you soon.